And we're live now. Good morning, everyone. I am Representative Tiffany Roberts, and I'll be presiding over this work session of the Joint Standing Committee on Innovation, Development, Economic Advancement, and Business. So the purpose of this meeting is for the committee to receive information from staff in order for members to consider legislative proposals before them and make recommendations or reports to the legislature. Only committee members, the committee analyst, and those specifically invited to attend will be participating in the work session using Zoom. For members of the public wishing to observe this meeting, it is being live streamed on the committee's YouTube channel, and it will also be recorded for viewing after the meeting is concluded. We are also broadcasting the audio of this meeting on the legislature's website at www.legislature.maine.gov. The YouTube live stream of this meeting, which is accessible to the public, begins at the scheduled start time for the work session and will remain on until the end of the day's work. If your video or audio is on, even if the committee is not, then in active session on break, you can still be seen or heard. Just a reminder. We've all gotten pretty good about shutting our things off. So please remember to mute your microphone. Everyone's names are where they should be. This is a public meeting, and I remind you that while we're meeting, the discussion must happen on screen and not using the Zoom chat. You may use the chat to request or speak, or to indicate that you are having a technical issue. However, do not use the chat for any substantive discussions. If you're having technical difficulties, please contact our committee clerk, Eva Reed, who will help try to resolve the problem, or contact LIL, Legislative Information Office. Members will speak at leave of the chair. Materials will be provided electronically for this meeting, either through a screen share, email, or posted on the committee materials page before the meeting or soon after. When it comes for the committee to vote, we must have a quorum present, at least 7 members, including a signer. In order to be counted present, you must be visible on your screen. So now let's go to our committee members, starting with Representative Geiger.
Good morning. I'm Representative Valley Geiger, representing District 93, Rockland and Owl's Head.
Good morning. I'm John Andrews. I represent District 73, Buckfield, Hebron, and Paris. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Pebworth. I represent the Blue Hill Peninsula, which includes Blue Hill, Brooksville, Brooklyn, Castine, Surrey, and Sedgwick.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Collimore. I represent House District 106, Pittsfield, Clinton, and Detroit.
Good morning. I'm Senator Scott Searway and represent District 16, which covers Waterville, Winslow, Fairfield, Benton, Albion, Clinton, and Unity Township.
Good morning. Representative Jack Ducharme, House District 111, representing Solon, Norwich Walk, and Addison.
Representative La Rochelle.
Reagan La Rochelle, House District 86, which is part of Augusta. Sorry, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sue Bernard. I represent District number 149, which is Caribou, Westmanland, and New Sweden. And I'm sorry that I didn't change up my background because I wanted to show you the beautiful fluffy snow coming down, and it's gorgeous, and all the skiers and all the snowmobilers are rejoicing.
And good morning. I'm Senator Chip Curry. I serve as the Senate chair for this committee. And I represent Senate District 11, which includes the 26 rural, coastal, and island communities of Waldo County. Good morning.
And again, I'm Representative Tiffany Roberts. I represent House District 6, which is the majority of both North and South Berwick. I'd also like to introduce our committee clerk, Miss Eva Reed. Eva, if you just want to say hi. Oh, maybe her camera's not working. And can you give everyone the phone number in case they need to reach you there, in case they can't see it on the screen?
You can reach me at 207-287-4880.
Thank you. And we also have our OPLA analyst, Ms. Rachel Olson, who's with us today. She'll be walking us through bills as needed. And I think that's everything there. So to get things started, I'm going to start by opening the work session for LD 1885, an act to increase Maine's veterinary workforce. And Eva asked that you bring Representative Fay in. Ms. Olson, did you have anything additional for us, or are we just kind of continuing on here?
I don't have anything additional myself. I was not tasked with anything further, but there was a question directed towards Mr. Norbert at FAME regarding where certain funds that have already been distributed still stand. And he provided an updated memo regarding that information that I believe Representative Ducharme had requested. So that was provided to the committee in advance as well. I can answer questions about that if the committee has any questions. It did clarify that if an individual was to take prorated forgiveness, that means it could take about, I think, up to 8 years. And I think they have 11 to meet their contractual, I should double check that, but obligation. So, and that the first dispersal for someone who might start in their first year of veterinary school could be their first year. So you're talking 4 years of veterinary school plus then at a minimum the 4 years to meet your contractual service obligation. So at least an 8-year period that money is essentially tied up from being loaned to being forgiven, and could be longer if working at a prorated structure, which I think maybe could be common given the fact that certain large animal vets probably divide their time between a small animal practice and working with large animals. I think that's common, not the only way to do it, but could be considered common, and therefore under the rules of the program receive prorated forgiveness and therefore need to work longer than the 4 years.
Does the committee have any questions right now for Ms. Olson? Okay, not seeing any. Representative Fay, are you there? I see your photo, but not you.
I think I am. I got hung up. I got hung up in the wormhole. I thank you, Representative Roberts, for inviting me in, so I don't feel like I'm lurking.
Did you have anything that you wanted to address before we dive into anything else here?
I'm just here to be supportive of the committee in any way that I can be, and if there are additional questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. And yeah.
Okay. Did the committee have any questions for Representative Fay? Seeing none. Representative Andrews?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question. I don't have a bill in front of me because we're on Zoom, but the rural area underserved need is going to be determined by the agricultural commissioner. I was wondering if the sponsor would be okay if we added a line that says that determination would be approved by the agricultural legislative committee, just as kind of a check and balance, so one person isn't doing all the heavy lifting.
That's an interesting. It's a good question. I'm not.
You're a little broken up. Representative Fay.
Am I frozen?
Yes. Let's try that. You shut your video off and unmute. Yep. Yeah. We didn't
Okay.
catch hardly any of that.
That's what I was afraid of. Please apologize. I'm turn my video off so that I have better bandwidth here, I think. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, great. Representative Andrews, thanks for the question. That's a thought-provoking proposal. And I think it would be interesting to think about what that process would look like. My only concern is in rulemaking, if we're talking, minor technical, I don't think those go back to the legislature, but I do think that they're open for public comment. And major substantive rules, would take some time to implement. And I think that's up to the committee to decide whether, whether that time frame is, whether we're talking about something that's emergent that needs to happen right away. I do know currently that the commissioner has designated the entire state as an underserved area for agricultural vets, and I think that's correct. I think that's true.
If that's the case, how is that going to prevent, new vets going to more urban areas than the remote rural areas and where our farms are potentially? That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, no, I understand that. You bring up a really good point, and I think the commissioner's definitely in the best position, because they have the state veterinarian, and so they're in the best position to understand what parts of the state are underserved. So yeah, I don't really have an opinion on that. I think you could look at it both ways. So that's a decision I think that this committee should probably make. You guys understand how these programs work a little bit better than I do. So I would defer to your wisdom.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Geiger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get clarification of Representative Andrews' question. So as I look at section 2, number 6, underserved geographic regions, underserved means geographic region of the state in which there's an insufficient number of practitioners as determined by the Commissioner of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. And who is it that you thought ought to be involved in that rather than that department?
That's a good clarifying question. So the commissioner would make that determination, right? Then I would just like that to come back to the agricultural committee that has members from more diverse geographic areas in the state than one person. Perhaps they know their areas better and could advocate if they had a more drastic need than was determined. I'd just like a check and balance as opposed to a broad, kind of unilateral decision. So I think if the purpose of this bill is to get people to where they need to be to serve our animals, I think it's very important that that's where they wind up, if that makes sense.
Ms. Olson.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to step in just to talk a little bit about, though it says determined by the Commissioner of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, I believe that the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry testified that when they use essentially an advisory committee to make the current determination, which includes the state veterinarian. And in their testimony, they indicated that the new determination around emergency and critical care can't be as easily determined as livestock or large animal, but that they would be able to do so, and they would consult the animal welfare program as well as the state veterinarian in making that determination. And then again, we're talking about two different determinations. So the first one is emergency and critical care as well as large animal medicine for insufficient veterinary services, and then a separate determination for an underserved geographic region. So those are two separate determinations, both made by the designation is by the commissioner, and then the commissioner works with individuals within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry with expertise in veterinary medicine and animal, and in the case of the new change, would consult animal welfare programs as well.
Is anybody involving the farmers who work with the livestock, or is it all more association type folks?
I would have to look at their sort of the rulemaking process to determine if they discuss it with anyone other than the people that I just mentioned.
Okay, thanks.
Seems like we're starting to get into a discussion, and before we do that, is there anyone in the attendee list that anyone is looking to hear from. I know Representative Ducharme, do you have the information that you wanted from FAME, or did you want Mr. Norbert to come in, or are you all set?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'll go to Representative Hassenfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just saying that I'm fine with Representative Andrews' suggestion there, as long as it can logistically be done in a smooth way. I think if you make the rules major substantive so that they have to come back to the legislature, it's just going to get really clunky. But I do appreciate the fact that it should not be one commissioner who determines what is underserved and what isn't. So I think, either a clear definition in statute saying, what the qualifications of underserved are, or some sort of legislative oversight is fine. But Rachel, I would probably have to task you with getting that in the most efficient manner.
Do you want me to give you? Okay. So I would agree that potentially making that single rule major substantive could create obstacles to implementation that might not be desired by the committee. You could potentially consider directing the commissioner to work with specific individuals on the development of the rule. So I think that's something that the committee could consider if you wanted to try to make it statutorily required to discuss with other individuals. I did pull up the department's testimony where they talked about their current process for more specific information. But that's something that you could consider. In other cases, if there's a concern around what's decided as an underserved geographic region, we have had bills in the past where certain counties have been designated. So in determining this, they must include certain regions. We did something like that in a bill last session. So that's another potential route to maybe meet Representative Andrews' concern. So those are just some initial ideas off the top of my head.
I really like the idea of adding a definition, Representative Hassenfuss. I think that's a great idea. And if we can kind of put language that would have to include certain counties that might get overlooked, I think that would be a great solution to a possibly really good bill.
Just a friendly reminder to members so we don't start cutting each other off that members should be speaking at leave of the chair when you're called on, just so we're not cutting off Ms. Olson or anything else. To kind of recap where we left off last time, Senator Searway had made a proposal, I think was 8 slots with 4 and 4 at 30,000 for a loan cap. And I think then I had come back and said maybe 35 since it's been 10 years and tuition's gone up. And I think that's kind of where we broke there. And that's where talk of numbers stopped. Representative Andrews, is your hand up from before or is that for now?
I just forgot to take it down, but if we can address the idea of a definition sooner than later, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Representative Geiger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to go back to that discussion we had last week and just start with the assumption of who is this meant to serve? And from my perspective, this bill is meant to serve the state of Maine by helping students lower their debt rates so that they can choose places that are underserved. And so I'm worried that we'll make this program too narrow with not enough money to change the game for the state of Maine. This program is about bringing more veterinary students to the state of Maine to practice. And I think we got caught up with, are we giving something for nothing? Are we giving to undeserving students? When we walk through, this is, we have no veterinary school. We have an acute shortage of vets of all kinds, particularly in the north and western sections of Maine. And this program is meant to bring those students here to practice when they're choosing in their last few years of veterinary school what they can afford to do given the kind of debt that they are leaving with. And what we've seen is that even Maine students are not coming back because they can't afford to. So I think 8 slots, 10 slots, but maybe we can get up to closer to Representative Roberts' 35 to 40 to make this a game changer for students when they're choosing where to practice, if it's in Maine or somewhere else.
Any further discussion, or folks feeling like we should caucus? Representative La Rochelle.
Thank you. During our last discussion, we had talked about also the possibility of expanding this beyond just Maine residents who are enrolled in the School of Veterinary Medicine. And I just wanted to bring that back up and see if there was any palette for that on the committee in terms of, again, making that a little broader to attract more potential people from out of state.
Representative Austin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Did I hear you say that Mr. Norbert is in the waiting room or not?
I believe so. Let me check. Maybe not.
Well, let me just throw this out. To Representative Geiger's thoughts, it has now reminded me of the over the years work that has been done on these types of loans to get some of our very specific professionals here to Maine. And I was just wondering, without it being a lot of work, I know we've done it on physicians, MD. I'm just not sure. Maybe he can help us just remember how many of these we have done. And if our language, it seems to me, I remember some of them having specific language about the area. I know we talked about dental and MD for our outer rim, for our folks there, and even on the islands getting services, professional services, medical services. And that was kind of the carrot. So I don't mean to put more length into it, but I think we might have some others that have been drafted. It might help us a little. Thank you.
Senator Seaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, certainly we want to do a caucus before we go into any type of vote, but we also, I think we're close to what you want to do. It's just, we want to make sure the rural people get taken care of. I do think that University of Maine has expressed that they have quite a bit of pre-veterinary type programs that really work well and are paid when they get done. So they're pretty in good shape for that. And I think if we can craft this so at least the veterinarians that are really needed in rural areas are met, I think that's the big one that we really think. And then it was brought up where it was difficult to get a vet in long distance areas, and the numbers are just not there for care and whatever compared to being in urban areas. And so we want to entice vets that can go up north and help them out. So I think, I think that those are the structure we're looking at. So I think if we can meet those goals, we'll pretty much be there. But just shooting that out there for you. So when we do caucus, maybe we can come up with a plan. But I think the rural piece has got to be clear. And I don't know what we can do to do that.
Just as a side note, Mr. Norbert's not here, but I did just receive a communication that the substantive rulemaking is not really recommended by them. Change the program too much. Again, he's not here, but people are listening. I'm just giving information as I'm getting it. Representative Hassenfuss?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just back to Representative LaRochelle's question. I think the expanding the capacity of vet techs and what they have to do to treat is something that is worth looking into. I, however, think would be a different bill or a companion bill to this. It's not specifically on point here. I think this is focusing primarily on the veterinarians, and then additionally, we could look at vet techs and to see if we can expand the scope of the treatment that they can do and what they can do to, especially in needed areas. And I think I join the consensus of this committee that let's get something that we can all agree on that's going to work, so we can put something, good bill in front of the appropriations table and said that we all agree that this is a good bill and in this iteration, whatever that is, and move some forward. So I don't know, do we, Ms. Olson, would we be able to develop the language now for a motion, specifically defining underserved area? Or is that something that would have to come back to us, or could we address it on language review? How would that work?
Okay, I'm unmuted. And I'll put my hand down. It's certainly something that we can address now. I'm not saying, again, I think the committee's in the tendency to feel like you need to wordsmith everything you give me, which is not the case. We want to just, if you tell me what the intent is, I'll bring you back that language to look at language review. So whoever makes the motion, all you need to do is tell me, how do you want to further define underserved region or the process in determining underserved region? So that's what I would need back from the committee. So if you wanted to designate certain parts of the state, you just need to tell me what those parts of the state are. If you want to determine some other process or require consultation, again, you need to tell me who you would want to be consulted or to work with on that process. So those are the specifics I need. We don't need to language smith it. I just need to know the substantive detail for me to put into language.
Representative Ducharme.
Thank you, Chairman Roberts. In this whole discussion of the geography of where these folks are going to be, it might not be a bad idea for us to reach out to Mr. Norbert or somebody in his group and find out where the current recipients of the money that are in this program are practicing. It would seem to make sense that if that program is already putting people, where they need to be, then okay, we're good. Maybe we need to expand the program a little bit, but if the program is funding, the education for people who are ultimately practicing in non-rural areas, then maybe that's the best indicator of whether or not this program is doing what it was intended to do. And I don't know if we can get that information, but that would be a question that I would ask.
Mr. Norbert is actually not able to join us this morning. That's not a help. We just got a message in the chat there that he's not able to pop over. Ms. Olson?
Thank you. And yes, I did reach out to Mr. Norbert, who's unfortunately unable to join us this morning. He said he's happy to take homework should the committee like to assign any to him. But I would follow up in his first memo back to the committee. Mr. Norbert did tell us that the veterinarians granted forgiveness through the program are now employed in the following main towns: Acton, North Berwick, Dover, Foxcroft, Fairfield, Gardner, Monmouth, and South Thomaston. So some of what Representative Ducharme was asking for, potentially not a complete list, but.
Thank you. Representative Hassenfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing to consider too is there's going to be a difference between the large animal vets and the emergency care vets. You don't have cattle and horses in downtown Portland. So like by default, those vets are going to be located in different geographical areas where there's more large animals than, emergency vets. And so it may make sense to say, keep the large animal vets the way it is, because just by the nature of the type of patient, they're going to be in more rural areas. And emergency vets, maybe that's where we need to say the emergency vets need to be in the more underserved areas, which would be X, Y, and Z. So just something to think about.
Representative Geiger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would second that. What I was going to say in listening to this was that it's already been determined that the entire state is underserved in terms of large animal vets, but that we would want to further clarify the expansion of the program, the other 6 slots that we were talking about, to make sure that they end up in places like Aroostook County, Western Maine, Washington County, where they are needed. So I think Representative Hasselbus is right that the small animals, the large animals taken care of by virtue of it's already been determined the entire state is underserved there, and that that is not necessarily an urban practice, but that when we're looking at emergency vets, we want to make sure that they flow to the places most in need, like Aroostook County, like Washington County. And I guess I would look to you, Ms. Olson, how would we do that?
Ms. Olson.
Sure. I guess. So again, I just want to point out, again, we're talking about 2 different things. There is the determination of an insufficient veterinary service, which is the expansion to include emergency and critical care. And then there's the separate designation of an underserved area. So there's 3 ways you could qualify for loan forgiveness. And that's through working with large animals, working in an emergency and critical care capacity, or working in an underserved geographic region. And you could, I believe the way that it could work is that you could work in an animal practice where you do 40% small animal, 40% large animal, and 10% of your time is working emergency hours. And I think you could cumulatively add up to 100, or you could be doing livestock in an underserved geographic region, or you could be doing small animals in an underserved geographic region only. So, and again, that's how the slots are being, in the amendment, are being parceled out, is to try to make sure that those areas are being met. So retaining livestock or large animal practice, and then currently the amendment that was put forward and then discussed with sort of different numbers would be any other group. So underserved, which could be large animal, could be emergency or critical care, and could just be what, a typical primary practice, if you will, for small animals, family practice. So, I think if the committee wanted to specify that emergency and critical care services, insufficient veterinary services as it relates to emergency and critical care, need to be in a specific area, I think, again, you just say that when making that consideration, they can only look at these regions, or that it must include at least these regions and could include others. So I think you could go in either direction if that's a way you wanted to approach that. And that could be for emergency and critical care and underserved, or just one. So again, that's up to the committee how they want to approach that, but you can specifically say where you want them to make that determination, or where you don't want them to make that determination.
Thank you. Representative Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing I just wanted to point out to rebut what Representative Hasselbus said about there not being horses in Portland. A quick Google search will show you there's actually Horse Island Camp on 48 Park Avenue. And then there's 2 right around Portland, 3, sorry, 2 in Cape Elizabeth and 1 in Westbrook, and then close by in Buxton as well. So it is in the urban areas, not just in rural Maine. So I think whatever we do for language needs to be consistent straight across.
Representative Bernard. You're on mute.
How much money do I owe you? Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we do have to be consistent. I like the idea of coming up with specific areas. I mean, if we don't have enough large animal vets in the Portland area, then we have to, mention that. If we don't, if we're the real if where the real need is more in a Washington County or in a Aroostook County or, name it, then I think that we do need to be specific, because I can tell you that I've seen legislation over and over again that doesn't mean to leave out an area. It's not that it's meant to be that way, but the truth is, if we don't have a lot of representation, and Aroostook County does not, then they're going to be forgotten. So I would love for the legislation to be pretty specific in terms of place, because that is very important. And let's face it, the state of Maine primarily is rural and agricultural. And that's why we can talk about, pardon me, the whole state being sort of underserved. But while I have every heart for every kind of animal, and I think I told you the story, or I told somebody the story of trying to get our my daughter's little dog in an emergency situation on a Saturday night or whatever it was, and couldn't find anybody. I guess the real worry to me is the large animals, whether they're horses, cattle, all of that really take care of our state. That's it's the larger animals that we really count on. And so I want to make sure that we have the vets that are needed in the rural parts of the state. That's my preference. And everybody has the right to their own, but that's what I wanted to say.
Representative Hassenfuss.
I was just kind of thinking out loud here. So we want this bill to address, getting more vets into rural areas. One, and there's kind of three different things in play here. One is the large animals, one is emergency vets, and one is an underserved area. So we could do it, and as Ms. Olson has said, we could do it in any number of ways. But so how are we going to put this together? Do we want to put it together so that if you are a small animal vet, you need to work in an underserved area and provide emergency care? Or do we want to say that, you can do any one of the three in an underserved area? How do we want to structure this and define this? I think that's kind of the crux of this, is what are we looking to put down here is, and it's large animal, fine the way it is, the entire state, small animals. My preference would not be to single it out by county or by region, but by a per capita, how many vets per capita in, the county or something like that, because you might have a more populous county that has one vet and another county, smaller population, that has, two vets. And if we just say, well, Washington County, or if we just list the county, then we don't really have the data to know what the right ratio is. So I'd like it to be some sort of proportional ratio. I think that would be, harder, but there's people out there at FAME, I think, could figure that out. So I think, and this is kind of hard to do, but we need to figure out how we want to structure that. So what vets go and where, and how we define underserved and that sort of thing. So I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop now, but that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Thank you, Representative. Just to kind of chime in here, the current program, this is already an existing program, and it works well as it is. I guess I'd want to caution the committee from putting geographic or population-based criteria in statute. That's kind of a heavy hand there. I personally am comfortable with the language as it is, where we are underserved everywhere, and getting, I think we're getting a little in the weeds there. I mean, to single out specific locations or based on a population count, I'm not sure that that's statutorily like appropriate to do. Representative Andrews?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe there are no emergency events north of Bangor. So, Ms. Olson, could you read the criteria list again? Perhaps we can combine some of those to just, excuse me, make a geographic area, or even add one, make a geographic area north of Bangor so that we are getting needed professionals into the area that doesn't have anyone in that field as of right now.
Yes. So the current, so as the bill, hold on, I'm going to put it on the screen. As the bill is currently written, and it doesn't change, it has not changed with any amendments yet. There is insufficient veterinary services. And I mentioned this during the bill analysis, and I would like to bring it up again. There is a difference between working at an emergency veterinary hospital and then providing emergency and critical care. You do not have to work at the hospital in order to provide emergency and critical care. Again, that would ultimately be up to the commissioner when determining how one would qualify for these for a loan forgiveness in these types of work. So it's possible that they could decide that you must work at one of the hospitals. That would be limiting, and that there are only 5 in the state. But certainly other veterinarians, through their practice or through their work at a practice, provide emergency and critical care services, including like after hours work or nights and weekends, or even home visits. So again, this would be currently determined by the commissioner. This is the bill as it's currently written. The amendment just changed the number of slots, designating number of slots. Currently, the designation is, well, no, you discussed many things, but the split is between large animal and everyone else. You could further define those slots out, but you have insufficient veterinary services, and that's livestock, meaning large animal, or emergency and critical care. So that would be determined. And in theory, you could have insufficient veterinary services for livestock and insufficient veterinary services separately for emergency and critical care. And that you could try to define a region, although I do think a ratio would be difficult.
Can we just add a number 4 to that under section 1 that says they'll include providers of emergency and critical care serving areas north of Bangor?
I mean, you could, that's certainly something the committee could consider, is trying to designate a region. I think north of Bangor we would need more technical language to actually define what that is. Counties are frequently used to do that. There are other ways I think that could be done. I would have to look into other possible ways to designate that. Might get really technical in the longitude and latitude or town boundaries or lines, but and then there's the separate underserved geographic region. This is the one that I had sort of mentioned as well, that you could, again, designate a specific region. I had suggested counties, and you could approach it as it can only include certain counties, or it must include these counties, but could include others. So there are two ways to approach a geographic designation, requiring the commissioner to include or to only use certain regions.
Representative Andrews, did you have a follow-up?
If Ms. Olson could draft up some kind of language for what I asked as an additional number 4, perhaps, I'd like to take a look at that.
I mean, again, I'm happy to draft something should the bill get tabled. Otherwise, I'll draft amendments as voted on.
Okay.
Representative Bernard. I think we're getting closer to a caucus if I'm misreading here.
I agree. I think we are as well.
Okay.
But before we do that, I just want to question the statement that was made earlier regarding that everything is working pretty well and the way that it is. And I have to question that because we don't have emergency vets north of Bangor. So I would, in my estimation, being north of Bangor, that means that it's not working all that well. So that's why I would love to have that additional language so that we can actually be trying to fix that particular problem. If we're going to have, if it's a problem, I think that's a problem. And so I think that we need to be looking at that pretty specifically. And I think, I don't know if we can do this now, but I would like to, because there seem to be so many questions and issues with how we can say this. Ms. Olson talked about issues with how it can be written, or maybe that she'd need some time to bring it back for language, that I would like to table this particular bill until we can get that language back. And that's in the form of a motion.
Second.
Yeah.
It's a tabling motion. There's no discussion there. Ms. Reed, if you could call the roll.
Representative Geiger,
Yes.
Representative Andrews,
Yes.
Representative Pepworth,
Yes.
Representative Collmore. Yes. Senator Rafferty's absent. Senator Searway.
Yes.
Representative Ducharme.
Yes.
Representative Austin.
Yes.
Representative Hassenfuss.
Yes.
Representative Learshell.
Yes.
Representative Bernard.
Yes.
Representative Roberts.
Yes.
Senator Curry is absent.
Okay, so all those in favor, this has been tabled. Ms. Olson, is it best for, one member to work with you on what they may be looking to do here, or what's the best way to handle this?
Any member of the committee who would like an amendment drafted for a bill before the committee only needs to reach out to me at any time in advance of the work session for me to draft something. As a reminder, I may only draft it as bullet points and not as formal language when I bring it back, depending on my ability to get something done before it comes back. So that's my only caution, is that while the committee might be familiar with seeing something fully drafted, it's actually best to move forward with bullet points and then allow me the time within my own department to draft language and have it reviewed by the legal reviewers within my office. So any committee member who would like an amendment, please reach out to me, and I will draft at your request, but that may only come back as bullet points.
And I would ask the committee to do that sooner rather than later, so we can put this back on the schedule for, say, like next Thursday. Ms. Olson, we have that open, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And please remember, please send me an email, a detailed email, or you can call me at my office in order to discuss anything that you would like.
Representative Hassenfuss, did you have a question?
Sort of. I was just wondering if we could, as a committee, to the points where we agree on this, because I know there's a lot of different chunks to this. So I think it'd be helpful if we could get to where we agree in terms of how much.
Representative, I'll just jump in here and remind you that this bill has been tabled, so we're no longer in discussion.
Shall I make a motion to take it off the table to further discuss?
You could.
I'll send an email to the committee, and maybe through email we can address.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, so we're closing the work session for LD 1885. Do committee members feel they need a 10-minute break before the next one, or do we want to plug on?
Now let's take a 10-minute break. I think.
Okay.
Thanks.
10:35, we'll be back on.
All right. Thank you.
Actually, do people want to caucus in between? And would we want a little bit more than 10 minutes so folks can caucus?
Sure.
The Space Corporation bill? How long would we like?
15 minutes.
15?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be back at 10:40.
All right.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Senator Stairway, I'll call you.
Okay.
Senator Seaway. We did check with the clerk of the House and Secretary of the Senate, and it is okay if you're co-sponsoring to chair a work session.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So all these times I chaired, I guess they told me different, but that's okay.
Unless there's like an obvious conflict of interest, like the chair would make money off the bill or anything like that, but co-sponsors are allowed to chair the work sessions unless we've expressly forbid it in our rules, which we have not.
Yeah. Okay.
Madam Chair, I believe Representative Bernard's having some technical difficulties, just FYI.
Oh, okay.
I think she's trying to get back in. She might have gotten booted.
There she is. Okay, looks like we have a quorum and we'll wait for everyone to kind of pop back on, but we will go to next on our list and open up the work session for LD 1923, an act to establish the Maine Space Corporation. And is Senator, yep, Ms. Reed, if you could bring Senator Daughtry in, and then I will throw it over to Ms. Olson. Representative Andrews, did you have a question or no? Okay.
And she looks like Senator Daughtry's in. I don't want to I hate starting when people are in the wormhole. Is that what we're calling? Okay, so we're going to start with, well, no, we're halfway through. We have LD 1923, an act to establish the Maine Space Corporation. The summary of the bill is as follows. The bill establishes the Maine Space Corporation to leverage the state's geographic, rocketry, manufacturing, and higher education assets and capabilities to establish the state as a national and international industry destination and an authority in launching small launch vehicles and small satellites into polar orbit. The corporation may establish and promote the Maine Space Complex. That includes 3 essential business units. The first is the Maine Space Data and Advanced Analytics Center of Excellence. This is a state-of-the-art computer center with networks equipped to import or downlink, store, cleanse, manage, and analyze satellite data in concert with terrestrial data for the purposes of addressing businesses and public issues in innovative ways and creating new data products and services. It also would establish a business unit called the Maine New Space Innovation Hub. This is an industry meeting place, a hub for new business incubation and acceleration, facilities for satellite and launch vehicle manufacturing, and integration and ground control for satellite launch operations, containing specialized equipment to facilitate business research and development, academic and scientific inquiry, and a kindergarten to grade 12 learning center, and designed to attract both in-state and out-of-state interests. And then the third component would be the Maine launch sites and services, staging and launch sites for sending small vehicles with nano satellites into polar orbit. The bill also establishes the Maine Space Complex Fund for the purposes of receiving funds from the state and gifts, grants, devises, bequests, trusts, or security documents to support the operations of the corporation and the complex, and also the Maine Space Complex Job Increment Financing Fund to receive job tax increment transfers from job creation in the properties leased or owned by the corporation. We have the following individuals testify in favor. There was no testimony provided in opposition, and we did have a piece of testimony submitted by Michael Allen from DAFS. He's Commissioner for Tax Policy, and I believe we do have at least one representative from DAFS related to tax policy with us, should we have further questions around that. And the first one, actually, potential issue or technical problem, which was identified during testimony, and I was asked to look into specifically by Senator Searway, and that was that the Maine Space Complex Job Increment Financing Fund, which is section 13210, creates a potential duplicate situation as it relates to the job increment financing funds for the Brunswick Naval Air Station Job Increment Financing Fund and the Loring Job Increment Financing Fund. So there already are job increment financing funds for both of these locations. And as the intention is for 2 of the sites listed above to be housed at those facilities, you could essentially potentially end up with 100% back for those, and that just creates a duplicative situation. DAPS also mentioned a few other technical concerns should the committee continue to move forward with that section that would need to be addressed. One is that it references a program that had a sunset date of 2018. There's a date around when the commissioner would certify information annually that is suggested to be adjusted to allow for processing time. There is an omission, so I'll note that the language in the bill is modeled after Brunswick's Job Increment Financing Fund, and there is an omission about language requiring employers to report. And then there was also a note on the term ancillary facilities, which is used in the bill, but mostly within this section. And it's used quite frequently, and therefore should probably have a definition included in the definition section. Again, should the committee decide to move forward on this section, and there is an incorrect headnote. I attached the full memo from DAPS there, but I'll add here, I know it's a little out of order, but as it relates to the technical issue, Senator Daughtry did ask that I put forward to the committee, and I know she is present as well, but an amendment that would strike that entire section from the bill. It would not impact the remaining portion of the bill to do that. That's point 1. I also identified that there may be a conflict between the membership of the board, which includes representatives from the state's space economy infrastructure. That's in section 13203. And then the prohibition on members of the board of directors from acquiring or holding a direct or indirect financial or personal interest in a corporation activity, property, or contract or proposed contract in connection with a corporation activity. I am certainly not an expert on how the model would work, but in a straight read, it seems that if you have members on your board who represent businesses in the state involved in the aerospace industry, or who conduct research related to the aerospace industry, that there is a possibility that those individuals would have or hold some type of direct or indirect financial or personal connection. And I feel like there's a conflict there. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but my thought on this is that since the language before you is modeled directly on the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority statute, that may have been an oversight in drafting the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority statutes. Their trustees are members of the community, essentially from the surrounding towns within that region, and are not part of a business, but I mean, they could through their work and through their regular work, and that would have to be disclosed. Whereas here, the board is actually made up of people within the industry. So this may present an issue. And then the last note is purely for the committee's consideration. As this is modeled after the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, as well as other similar groups that are considered quasi-state entities for the purposes of Title V, Chapter 379, Subchapter 3, quasi-independent state entities, that the committee could consider whether the Maine Space Corporation should be added to the list of quasi-independent state entities subject to reporting on competitive procurement and contributions and a biannual review. I should say biennial review of such actions by the Legislative Committee of Jurisdiction with a report to OPEGA. We will be doing these reviews next week for the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority and the others. I will note the definition of quasi-independent state entity for the purposes of that subchapter means an organization that has been established by the legislature as an independent board, commission, or agency to fulfill governmental purposes and that receives revenue that are derived in whole or part from federal or state taxes or fees. There is a difference, and although it seems small, it may be substantial enough for the committee in their consideration of this point. In the establishing statute for the corporation, which is the first one, section 13201, it says it's a body corporate and politic. What it doesn't say is that it is, it does not say it is a public instrumentality or any other version of the entity is performing a governmental function. All of the other quasi-independent state entities do contain that language or similar language, and that in and of itself may be enough in the committee's consideration to not include them in the list. But because as you'll note in the definition, it says to fulfill a governmental purpose, as well as the revenue piece. So if the committee would like to consider this or pursue this avenue, I have attached the statute, which talks about the evaluation criteria and the legislative standards that would need to be in anything that was going to be considered a quasi-independent state entity for the purposes of that chapter. But again, because it's not designated as a public instrumentality, that is something the committee might want to consider when thinking about whether or not it should be considered a quasi-independent state entity for the purposes of that section. Okay. There's a little bit here, so I'm happy to go back. I'm also happy to pause, but we did have information requests as well. The first one had to do, there was mention of the fact that this is an issue that has been in front of the committee and the legislature before for many years. And there was a mention of the bill from the 129th, the second regular session of the 129th. That was LD 2092, which was presented by former Senator Bellows. At the time, this was a resolve that established the Maine Spaceport Complex Leadership Council, which is a public-private partnership of private spaceflight commercial interests, local, state, and federal government, academic entities, in order to lead the development and implementation of a spaceport complex in the state, and to orchestrate engagement with external stakeholders and investors. Part of this resolve was for the council to develop a strategic plan and to present that plan to the governor and to the Joint Standing Committee, to this Joint Standing Committee. The history of that bill, just as context, it was, it had a public hearing on March 5th, work session on the 12th in 2020 of March. The committee voted unanimously ought to pass as amended. The committee amendment did some more or less technical things. It added emergency preamble and clause. It clarified appointments, what would happen if a legislator wasn't reelected but was serving on this group, and changed the reporting date. But the bill was voted as a carryover for the potential of any special session, which we know was not held, and so the bill died upon the conclusion of the 129th in November. That being said, the work that was going to be conducted as a part of the resolve essentially was able to be continued. Dr. Shahada and Emily Dwinells, the project director for the Maine Space Complex strategic planning process, spoke about this. The work specifically related to the development of a strategic plan was able to continue through financial support from EDA and MTI. A strategic plan has been developed and will be available on February 11th. 2022. That date was not able to be advanced. Ms. Dwinells indicated that the strategic plan will cover the following bullet points. It would share findings from the aerospace industry assessment, including an overview of Maine's 85 companies that actively participate in the aerospace industry, capabilities and ability for growth, cost estimates and funding opportunities for the proposed complex. It would outline STEM education initiatives in the K-12 community, as well as partnership opportunities with the vocational and community colleges and UMaine, USM, and the Rue Institute. It would highlight R&D priorities and leverage Maine's proficiency in precision manufacturing and advanced materials and composites, as well as others. It would compare Maine with other leading states around business incentives and policies related to space exploration. Can I say that? I want to say that. And then share the outreach plan. to the outreach plan that is being or has been developed to engage the communities across the state in raising awareness around the opportunities and the impacts of a geographically distributed space complex. It would also have the near-term objectives, of which one is the establishment of the Maine Space Corporation, as you see before you in the bill, and its indication as a matter of urgency as it relates to the application for federal funding, which is coming available in the next several months. That strategic plan is not available, but that is what's going to be in the strategic plan when it is released later this week. The committee also asked a question
regarding the recovery of rockets and how this element could contribute to the industry and economy in Maine. Dr. Shahada submitted a follow-up to many of the questions that the committee asked. He indicated it's not unusual for launch providers to have their own recovery team, but the corporation could recommend Maine contractors to provide this service to launch providers as a part of the launch provider's consideration in using Maine and Maine's facilities for launch. Representative Geiger inquired about how the lack of housing in the state intersects with the proposed economic developments in the bill. Again, this would be mostly speculative, but he indicated that the expected development from the Maine Space Complex operations would give reason and incentive for developers to invest in new housing or to renovate existing buildings for housing. So there's the general speculation that when there's economic development, housing will follow. My only note on this would be, of course, we're talking, as was indicated in the testimony, many, but not all of the jobs involved in this new industry would be jobs that paid higher than the average salary of the state. So while this may contribute to an increase in housing, it may not address questions around affordable housing. But again, that's purely, that would be purely based on speculation. I do have information about the fiscal note of the bill, which I'll get to in the fiscal impact section as well. And then the committee wanted more information about similar proposals or programs existing in other states. So I was able to pull some of this information for the committee, and there are 4 identified spaceports that have public-private public corporations similar to the one being proposed today. Alaska Aerospace Corporation, Space Florida, Virginia Space, and the New Mexico Spaceport Authority are all examples of private-public corporations created through the statutory authorities. There are other models being pursued, and those were talked about during testimony. Michigan was brought up. Michigan's pursuing theirs through a private initiative through the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association. From a brief research, they're in similar planning stages to Maine in terms of identifying launch sites. So I linked that information to the document as well. Maritime launch, Halifax was specifically mentioned as well. This is, of course, in Canada, which has a different governmental structure than the United States, but it appears maritime launch is a private industry that's pursuing these avenues. Of course, it does appear that Canada had to make some changes at their national level, a decision around wanting to become a launch country. But once those regulatory changes were made, I believe that's opening the door for these types of private companies to pursue this type of work or this industry. There was also mention of Texas. So there is the Texas Aerospace and Aviation Advisory Committee. This is now housed within the Economic Development and Tourism Office. This was formerly Texas Aerospace Commission, which I believe was more similar to what you're seeing today. But that was older and has since been incorporated into their department. They do have in statute a Spaceport Trust Fund, which does provide some funding to this type of work. And then in California, there's the Vandenberg Space Force Base. And as that was mentioned, that is predominantly for military applications and not commercial and predominantly larger rockets than those that are being proposed here in Maine. Additional information, I mean, again, this is just because there's always an interest a little bit in these. The corporation is subject to the Maine Tort Claims Act, so I have included that there, and also all of the requirements under the Maine Business Corporation Act's general powers as well. And it does require for when you are spending over 250,000 of your operating revenues to pursue equal opportunity employers. And this is the definition of what equal opportunity employers means. I talked about the amendment already. And then in terms of a fiscal impact, there is no fiscal status determined yet. There's no appropriation attached to the bill in front of you. And so that's what Dr. Shahada said there. The bill does not have a fiscal note. What he means by that is there's no appropriation or allocation request. They've indicated they're in discussions with EDA and MTI to secure additional funds that would support the startup of the corporation. After the corporation was up and running, they would be in a better position to apply for and secure financial support from the federal government, and also generating revenues from the use of their facilities, the issuance of bonds for infrastructure development. That in the future, the corporation may request state appropriations for nominal operating costs following discussions with the government of Maine. I'll note it does appear that if you look at some of the annual reports of the other spaceports in operation in public-private partnerships, the amount of funding coming from the government, from the state, those states has varied from, in some cases, none to, in some years, more. So they're not steady appropriations in some of those cases. And that they all allow for other revenue sources other than state appropriations. The DAFs did say, of course, the preliminary fiscal impact statement is still not available, that the administrative costs are nominal and could be absorbed within current budgetary allotments. So I would expect similar information to be included in some capacity once we do have a fiscal note on whatever it is the committee decides to move forward on. And then there's more information around financing and revenue in the testimony follow-up submitted by Dr. Shahada. I included Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority's statute at the end of the bill analysis, if the committee would like to do any type of comparison, but it's there for your reference. All right, I know that was a lot. I'd like to answer any questions the committee might have around this piece of legislation.
Can you unshare so I can see this array of members?
I know I had forgotten to put my own chat box up, so I'm sorry if I just talked right over someone's hand.
Questions from the committee for Ms. Olson? Senator Seray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, I was wondering, I was looking at the list of models, and I didn't see where the states had gotten involved much. So can't private businesses do this on their own without the extra layer of government? Because it seems like we'd slow the progress down. And then, and if we can, once we nail down our launch locations, the very fact that we will have one become an extremely compelling reason for private investors to invest in Blue Shift. And I was wondering if that's been discussed or how that works.
I think some of that might need to be directed at Dr. Shahada, as well as the others involved in the development of the bill before you. So I will note the four states currently have programs that are very similar to the one before you. They are public-private partnerships, Alaska, Florida, Virginia, and New Mexico. So those are created in a very similar way to the one that you have before you. And I believe that Texas is when it began, which was a while ago, and of course they have a very different aerospace industry in Texas than what could be developed here. I believe it started in a similar way. It has since changed through their sunsetting provisions and an incorporation into their economic development and tourism office. So those at least are, we do have 4 examples of spaceports. Virginia's is in fact quite predominant. I think it's been around for a long time. Alaska's has been around for a while, but it's a much smaller capacity. And then I think that's the only part I could answer.
So just follow up on that, Madam Chair. So without the uniqueness of our own launch sites, actually, it doesn't take away from our ability to raise dollars as easily in this situation.
I'm not an expert on this. I can tell you that as the bill has been put forward and as individuals testified, and as it appears to be I did not do an in-depth research on these 4 examples, but in a cursory view of the materials, it does appear that their reasoning behind the development of these public-private corporations is to operate as a business, but to be able to apply for as many types of revenue streams as possible. And I believe the other element has to do with the fact that the sort of the regulatory environment of the aerospace industry. So unlike potentially other industries, it's more like if you think about aviation, you need to be, you have to work with the FAA, and there are sort of other regulatory and environmental elements that would go into this type of an industry that I think could be difficult for private businesses, especially smaller ones, to navigate. And that I think what was said in testimony is that this would help to overcome some of those obstacles, and that appears to be the case in the other examples of private public corporations. The other example that I have provided here in the United States is in Michigan. So that is a private endeavor by the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association, but it in many ways, it models what's being created, but without the state level involvement. And it does state that their purpose of being together as this Michigan Aerospace Manufacturers Association is to deal with legislative and other regulatory hurdles, and does require the businesses to pay dues in order to be a part of that. Although this bill also requires businesses, or hold on, I want to use the right word, members of the corporation, which are individuals and organizations, to also pay dues. So, I mean, they're tackling it. So there is another model out there, but it seems like the idea here is to be able to pursue all of the revenue streams, and to have an organization that can deal with some of the regulatory hurdles, because this is such a regulated industry.
Thank you.
I see Senator Daughtry nodding her head. And did you want to weigh in, Senator Daughtry, just overview and maybe address some of the potential issues? I know there is an amendment, but there seem to be a couple other potential hurdles in the bill. I didn't know if you wanted to give a quick.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Representative Roberts. And good morning, esteemed members of the IDEA Committee. Also, a huge thank you to your incredible analysts for such a detailed and thorough overview of the bill. First off, Rachel was able to highlight, I did neglect, I apologize, in the presentation of the bill to present the amendment that everyone had signed on to from DECD and DAFS and Dr. Shahada and myself as the lead sponsor, to remove the TIF portion of the bill. I'm not a tax expert, so I would defer to folks who might be in the waiting room to sort of explain the issues, but it became clear it had been, the language as mentioned was sort of modeled off after in part the Mid-Coast Redevelopment Authority. And the way and the structure of this doesn't have the same mechanism that they would have, say, in Loring or in Brunswick Landing. And so the TIF actually became a like weird issue. So our request is to just strip that portion from the bill entirely. Hopefully a pretty easy, straightforward part of the bill. Also, you know, there's been a lot of questions about, and Senator Searway, you highlighted this, about the question of the need to have involvement of state government. And does this necessarily put a barrier? And Rachel just said it absolutely eloquently. So I'll just sort of try to give the quick version of it is needed. And in most other models, this is how it started, especially if you look at a place like Texas, which now has a booming aerospace industry. It did start with this public-private partnership. And also because, you know, space travel and air travel is, you know, covered by federal agencies such as, you know, FAA, et cetera, having that tie-in to state government makes it much easier. And additionally, you know, if you're looking at things like, you know, federal space grants, you know, innovation grants, it's a lot of international, you know, different setups, you know, you're looking at these federal resources that really need to have that sort of state government connection. So this is not creating something entirely new. It's been a proven model that has worked in other states. And so that's why, you know, we're at this point. And I think the real key part of it is to remember, you know, when we look at bills, sometimes when we joke about it's a, you know, a bill looking for a problem to solve without a problem. This is a request that is coming from private businesses. These are folks who are working in this industry every day, who are seeing barriers to their ability to innovate and grow right here in Maine. We're not talking about big businesses, you know, from outside. We're not talking about, you know, Jeff Bezos's space company, for example. I've had that brought up in some email, you know, communication. We're talking about homegrown businesses that are on the cutting edge of this type of technology, and they are asking us to do this. So I think that's the key thing to keep in mind. There's many different things I can add. I really just want to be here as a resource and to answer any questions. I know, first off, from when this bill was before this committee before in a prior legislature, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of different technical pieces. So I just want to be here as a resource. I just do want to highlight one comment that I had a lot of emails about. I think there are some misconceptions about what type of launches we're talking about. You know, these small nano satellites really are predominantly for research and telecommunications. And, you know, when you look at being able to launch for Maine, it's a much more environmentally friendly launch site because of the distance it takes. And additionally, when you think about the technology that can come from this, this is going to benefit our students, our higher education. And honestly, one of the folks I've talked to has talked about how these can be used for broadband and potentially could help us be able to deploy a much better communications array for our state. We're not talking about, you know, personal, you know, space travel and who knows in the future, you know, potential afternoon joyrides to the moon. We're talking about things that are used to benefit our life here on this planet and to make our life easier and really, you know, be able to learn more about ourselves and this wonderful, beautiful planet we're on. But happy to answer any other questions and really, really excited about this and can probably talk a little bit too long about it as well.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Bernard.
Thank you very much, Chair Roberts. So I guess I'm going to take from what I just heard, Senator Daughtry, that we're not going to be able to have William Shatner come and visit us anytime soon. That's sad.
I have to say, I have to highlight my Star Trek coffee mug, and I'm sure there would be a way to get William Shatner to come visit.
We'll work on it. My questions are to you, Senator Daughtry, if that's appropriate right now, Representative. But so you mentioned that people are asking you who are within the industry to work on this particular piece of legislation. And my question to you is, did any of them, I mean, we keep talking about Blue Shift. So did you actually contact people from Blue Shift and ask them to have input on this legislation?
So they actually came to me from my prior work on being chair of the committee and also being involved in this bill before. Dr. Shahada has sort of been on the forefront of this. And so after the bill was unable to sort of come to fruition due to the COVID-19 pandemic, They approached me, they talked about what they've been doing and how they've seen that once again, things have kept going despite, the pandemic, but they are seeing this barrier of not having this coordinating council and this hub. And, it's not just Blue Shift. We have other companies here in Maine. We have one up, in your area of the state in Aroostook County who's been on the forefront of this as well. And it's coming from all of those different individuals. And, from the first meeting, it's been, many different people at the table, in every single aspect.
So may I follow up?
Yes.
I just want to be really specific. You said you've spoken to Dr. Shahada, but I mean anybody from Blue Shift. Who has it been from Blue Shift who you've spoken to get their input on the bill?
Sasha Derry, and apologize to Sasha if I'm massacring his name at all, as well as Seth Lockman, we've worked with in communications with Blue Shift.
And they like this bill in its set form. In other words, you've shown it to them and they think that this is good.
Yes, I would hate to speak for anyone and would be happy to get them to come in contact with the committee, but they have been involved in the process.
Thank you. I would love that as well. I would love to hear from them to make sure that this is not larger than they might need to be able to function in what they would like to do. So yeah, I would love to have that before we go too much further with this bill. I hope that we'll have time. I want to say out loud, I love the idea of space, the space economy. And I was at Loring Air Force Base, as I mentioned earlier in the last meeting, to see their first launch. And it was very exciting. And I would love to see that sort of thing happen more. And however the state of Maine can benefit from it, I'm all about it. But I sure don't want to jump into something that is a much larger answer to that particular gosh, thank you. I'm being served some soup. That I don't want to see something larger have to be set up in order to answer the question of what is I see as a private industry issue. In other words, they want to be able to move forward fast, and I would hate to see anything. I think we're hearing the same sort of problem, that it not be sort of crushed by something that's too large governmentally. So I just want to say that out loud, but also say that I'm all in favor of this. And I would love to work with you further, Senator Daughtry, to get the best piece of legislation to be able to push this industry further.
Absolutely. May I respond real quick, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just want to say, absolutely agree, Representative Bernard, and I will definitely shoot an email to the representatives at Blue Shift to make sure that they can follow up with everyone. And just to remind folks, if you check the testimony that's been submitted, it is a lot of private businesses who are saying that this is something that they would like to see. And especially when you look at the models in other states where they have pursued this path and this cooperation and collaboration, they are now, home to some of the most successful international companies that are bringing millions and millions and millions of dollars into their home state. And I know Dr. Shahada, I don't want to steal any of his steam, all of them have worked together on initial economic impact statement, but initial research is showing that if we're able to pull this off, these companies in collaboration with our incredible, higher education institutions could potentially be bringing in, 3,500 to 4,500, new jobs created here, partnering with our schools to be able to train our students right here in Maine in this type of field. And most importantly, we're looking at a potential impact of maybe $1.5 billion on our state, and bringing cutting edge technology to, communities. We all, joke about it on Zoom when we, go unstable internet or unable to have things connect. This is the type of engine and, innovation that can really fix, and really improve a lot of our infrastructure issues. We've seen from the first time, we were dreaming and launching, crafts into space, how many different technologies have come out of there that have improved, our day-to-day lives for those of us who are firmly rooted on the ground. So just wanted to say that, we have seen this type of public-private partnership work really well, not only, here, but in other areas of the state. So.
Thank you. Representative Hassenfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'm just going to give my summary of what I see this bill as being based on the language in it. And then please, Senator Daughtry, correct me where I'm wrong or steer me back in the right direction. I'm looking at it from like a 10,000 foot view. So essentially, it's a statute that we're creating that to set up a, let's call it a nonprofit organization that may receive some state funds. It seems that it's probably not going to receive much, or most of it can be used within existing state resources now. That nonprofit is then going to get federal funds to put into its fund that is also being established. And then that nonprofit must make a sort of headquarters, so to speak, with a lot of fancy computers and that sort of thing. And then it has the ability to purchase real estate and then lease that real estate, or sell it, make different contract negotiations. And so it sort of serves as like the hub of saying, look, all of these companies out here, we understand you want to launch these rockets, but it costs a lot of money to set up an airport for rockets, so to speak. So what we're doing is we're this private corporation, and we're going to say, we're going to set up airports. You're going to then pay us to launch your rockets, and we're going to negotiate the terms, all of that stuff. And additionally, if there's people want bonds or need something funded with low interest capital, we can provide that as well. And so we're kind of going to be your banker, your infrastructure, your everything to help you who are good at, your particular niche. You come here, you use our services, our, property, do your thing, and then you go back and grow your business. Is that essentially what this is doing?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely gets to the heart of it. The other portion that someone I'm blanking on who I've spoken to in the industry was reminding me, the other core issue of having this sort of coordinating council is when you're having a bunch of different companies who are wanting to do these launches, when you're working together to make sure you're not, stepping on each other's toes, and you're working to coordinate your launches. It's also sort of like being the conductor and the orchestra of making sure everything's working, which if you look in the bill language, it sort of gets at it and within the hub. I think the other part that doesn't get highlighted as much that I'm really excited about. So yes, here are all these reasons to bring your company and your research to Maine. But I come from the world of education. I've been, on the education committee most of my time here in the legislature, and I'm very passionate about our post-secondary institutions. And I think the other recipe for success is the brain power. And, I don't know if you've seen the news, but the University of Maine was just listed as one of our top tier research institutions in the country. So I see the other part of not only do we have hopefully this cutting edge corporation that's working to bring people together in the hub to do all the different roles that you just mentioned, Representative Hassenfuss, but also hopefully having that tie-in of saying, not only do we have all of this, but we have these incredible minds working on this. We have these incredible students. So you'll be able to come here, grow your business, and also have people coming out of, our schools ready to do these type of high paid, really exciting, I hate to use the word futuristic, but really, really cool jobs. So I think that's the other sort of piece that's part of it.
Thank you. Representative Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to start out by saying that as somebody whose living is in the innovation and in the research world, that the importance of having something that can help you with some of those federal level grants, I think is really, really important. What I want to avoid happening and what I am afraid of happening is the potential for private entities to have to now fight against a public-private partnership group for land opportunities or things like that. And I think what we need to make sure that we do is really make sure the language doesn't prevent private industry, like we already have an established company in our state if they're out pursuing areas to have a permanent launch site, for example, we should let them be able to do that and not have to pay expensive lease things. I don't know if you've seen what it costs to lease a launch site, but oh my God. And we are looking at very small industry because that's what Maine is, right? We're built on small businesses. So I think that we need to be really cautious, but allow for that fielding opportunity of those just incredible federal funds. I don't know if you all have had the chance to read the 1,500 page, 2,000 page infrastructure bill, but it's got a lot in there that can be fielded into Maine and support industry and support innovation. But let's not create another level of barriers that already exist with trying to get federal dollars. So I really want us to find that balance. I think one of the things that I really wish we had waited for this work session to see that report that's coming out on the February 11th. I think that there's going to be a lot of great knowledge that comes out of that would really help this bill be the best bill it can be for our state. And I hope that, you know, we have the opportunity to review that before there's any final language. And Senator, I really appreciate you bringing this bill to us. I think that it's important. You know, without investment in innovation, we will stay stagnant, and we need to compete in order to bring that business to Maine. So thank you for that.
Madam Chair, may I respond real quick? Absolutely. And those lease costs that you're mentioning are beyond astronomical depending on what area you're looking at. And I would definitely see, you know, I would leave this up to the folks who are doing this work to make sure there is that language of, you know, if someone has an existing site, that it's not becoming a burden to be working with this, you know, coordinating council and instead an asset. The other way I see it is that, say we have a new company that gets started up, you know, they're looking at maybe how to do, you know, a new recovery organization, or they're looking at, you know, one of the things I love about Blue Shift is their, you know, climate neutral launches and really trying to be like a leader in the environmental friendly, you know, cutting edge technology for this. So maybe they're, you know, it's a smaller company that wants to try out a new biofuel, and they're not necessarily looking at the full package, but they still need to be able to do a test. This isn't, you know, maybe a potential entity that'll be able to lease one of those sites or buy one of those pieces of land. So if you have this corporation who's able to sort of be the host site for some of these launches, or maybe they're putting you in, you know, contact with another entity that owns their own, you know, launch site, like you're saying, that cooperation means that that little small startup actually has a chance to try out their product without all of that overhead and all of that cost that they would have to be doing if they are taking this on as a solo private business. The other portion just to remember, I think, is, you know, Maine has always lagged on our investment in research and development. That is something when I was chair of this committee, we talked about a lot. And I think, you know, a bill like this sort of highlights the need for us to really step up. We have all of sort of the assets in line. We have great, you know, businesses, technology. We have wonderful research institutions here in our state, but we really need to, you know, push into the next edge to really invest in R&D. And I see a bill like this as one of those steps.
Thank you, Senator Daughtry. I don't see any other hands up. So do committee members have anyone that they would like to bring over? Representative Bernard? You're muted.
Oh, man, I can't afford this. I was actually going to suggest that, and I hate to have people who are waiting, I think that they need to speak, but I will say that since we got a lot of information about 40 minutes or so before we got together here this morning, 10 or 12 pages, 17 pages, sorry, that we needed to digest. I think because of that, and the fact that we have some questions that we probably would like to have to particular stakeholders, or at least I do, I would like to table this, and that's a motion.
Yeah, it's a motion.
Second.
Okay, Representative Andrews. Okay, non-debatable motion. Ms. Reed, can you call the roll?
Representative Geiger,
Yes.
Representative Andrews,
Yes.
Representative Pepworth,
Yes.
Representative Collmore,
Yes.
Senator Rafferty's absent, Senator Searway.
Yes.
Representative Ducharme,
Yes.
Representative Austin,
Yes.
Representative Hassenfuss,
Yes.
Representative Learshell,
Yes.
Representative Bernard,
Yes.
Representative Roberts,
Yes.
and Senator Curry is absent.
Okay, so this bill is now tabled. Before I close the work session, are there any requests to Ms. Olson for the next work session besides I'm hearing the strategic plan? Representative Austin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. One thing perhaps we could get is a little more clarification on, I saw it so quickly in the report that the work that Ms. Olson sent to us, and that was the EDA and the MTI maybe giving funds. If we could just get a little more, I was particularly interested in MTI, and I don't believe that they give commitments, but perhaps they do ahead of time, because I see that as a, initiatives are given, presented to them and they decide. So just some clarification on that. And I think that the good Senator Daughtry mentioned, someone mentioned 80, maybe it was Rachel, 80 companies that are presently here in Maine or have a presence. If we could just get even just a slice of the names of those, I would find that very interesting and helpful. I think that's it.
Thank you. Representative Collmore?
Thank you. In addition to that report that's coming out on the 11th that I'm very interested in, I'd also be interested, because one thing that I did notice that was really missing from what we had in testimony was some kind of statement of support from Blue Shift. Since we know that they are already the company that's here and existing in Maine, I would feel more comfortable knowing that they feel that there's no potential conflict. If there's any way to reach out to them and maybe have them at the next work session, I would appreciate that.
I believe Senator Daughtry heard that earlier and was going to work on that. Representative Andrews?
Thank you. I would second Representative Collmore's thoughts, and I would also like to get some more information on the Michigan model that was mentioned earlier with the bill analysis. Thank you.
May I ask what type of information you're looking for specifically?
How it came into being and kind of the split between public and private as it is now, and costs.
Okay, sure. The Michigan model is a private model. I'll pull as much info as I have. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer all of your questions.
Okay, thank you.
And Representative Ducharme?
Thank you, Chairman Roberts. One of the things that I did in looking at this is I pulled up the financial statement for the New Mexico Spaceport Authority. I think that would be something that would be really good for us to take a look at, because this, I believe New Mexico is fashioned, is constructed as this would be going forward. And I don't know if that's correct, but I'm thinking that. And New Mexico has been in existence for a considerable length of time. They've had over 300 launches out there. So looking at their financials might give us a clear sense of whether or not this is going to be a boon or a boondoggle, if you will. So that's something that I think we should look at.
Representative Bernard?
Thank you very much, Chair Roberts. I would just want to make sure that in the next iteration, and this is for Ms. Olson, that the next thing that it would make sure to have in there, and I honestly lost you a little bit, to be perfectly honest about it, and it had to do what you were talking about, the quasi-independent. You talk about the question of governmental purpose, and there was some language that you said probably was in there that needed to be fixed or changed or no?
No, sorry. I hope that was not my implication. The language, that is, so it's backing up. The bill before you, as was mentioned by Senator Daughtry, it uses the model language from the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority. With a few, there are some substantial, although seemingly minor, but there are some big differences between those. And one is that the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority is a public instrumentality of the state. And this bill before you does not include that language, and therefore is saying it is not a public instrumentality of the state by leaving that language out. And there are, but in addition, the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority has other powers that this does not have, including municipal powers, the power of eminent domain, the right to land entry. So the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority has different powers and does work as a public instrumentality. In this case, it's really set up as a corporation. It would be, I mean, I think with or without that language, it's still within the committee's purview to review the requirements of a quasi-independent agency to decide if you want to include them in that list. And that would only be for the purposes of reviewing their procurement and contribution policies, and then their annual procurements and contributions, as we will be doing for 6 agencies next week. It wouldn't really change. And then the review just results in a report to OPEGA. So
Ms.
that would be the
Olson?
understanding. Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to stop you there. We're going to cut because we're getting back into work session. This has come up before. Typically, before you make a tabling motion, requests should be asked then. I gave the committee a little bit of leeway to put the request in after we had this before, but we're now getting back into work session. So we're just going to kind of close this down now because the bill has been tabled. But just so the committee's aware going forward, before you motion to table a bill, you should ask for the additional information from the analyst. I think we had that last time, Representative Bernard.
So when you kept, sorry, just for clarification for me. So we cannot at this point ask Ms. Olson for something specific for the next time we come back. Is that right?
I'm sure you can email her if there was something else. I kind of gave committee members a little bit of leeway, but now all kinds of hands are going up and the work session is closed.
Can we recall the table motion then if we want to get these questions in?
If someone wanted to motion to open the work session back up.
I think there's a few questions we don't want to waste time and prolong another table motion, another one, if we can get the answers now. That's the only thing I'm saying, so.
You're on mute.
I'd like to make a motion that we take this off the table for purposes of the committee member asking the analyst any questions that they might have prior to the next work session.
Motion, is there a second? Second.
Second.
Yeah, show hands. To open back up. Actually, let's take a roll call because we're scattered. Ms. Reed?
Representative Geiger?
So just for clarification, I am voting to remove the table and go back for discussion.
Mhm.
Yes.
Representative Andrews?
No.
Representative Pepworth?
Yes.
Representative Collmore? No. Senator Rafferty is absent. Senator Searway?
Yes.
Representative Ducharme,
Yes.
Representative Austin.
May I ask a clarifying question, Madam Chair?
Can we continue with the roll call, Representative?
Well, I don't know, can we? But, I just don't want to not be able to ask the question if we get any, okay, all right, fine. Yes,
Representative Hassenfuss,
Yes.
Representative Larishaw,
Yes.
Representative Bernard,
I have a question about this roll call. May I ask that question before I vote?
About the roll call? Yes.
Yes. I want to know if we open this back up for questions, will we lose the ability to table the question before we try to push it through to a vote? Okay.
No.
Then I'll say yes.
Representative Roberts,
Yes.
and Senator Curry is absent.
Okay, so we're going to open the work session back up for LD 1923, and I will look to the committee for discussion or questions. Representative Hassenfuss, your hand has been up.
I would just the request that in future, before a motion is made by anybody on the committee to table, that you please flag it for everybody so that if any questions do want to be asked of anybody, they can be asked before the motion is made, because motion to table does not have any further discussion. So just procedurally, I think that would be a nice courtesy for everybody on the committee, just so that if somebody does have a question, they're not cut off by a motion to table and can then think hard over from there. With that, I will let anybody ask questions.
Representative, Senator Searway, bouncing around my screen.
I just have two things that someone brought to me is one is what's the clear and assurances do we have that once the infrastructure is in place, will it not be used for military purposes either now or in the future? And I guess part of that is who will be held accountable if we are misled as to what happens. That happened in other countries and states like Kodiak and Alaska. So those are two examples that it has happened. So I'm just trying to hit that before we go into that. And I just, the other part was, when we pick the sites here, we've got these 3 sites. I can see Loring, but when you get into Brunswick, it's very highly populated, and how's that affected? And also Jonesport, those, I just didn't know who we could get to speak on that, how the communities accept that and how that works.
Yeah, I respond.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and I do have I need some clarification as well. So Senator Searway, your first question was, or is your first question, are there any assurances that this corporation and its subsequent business units won't be used for military purposes? Was that your first question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second point that you mentioned about launch sites and services, I believe if you were to go back to the proposal, and I'll just mention that my understanding is that the strategic plan, which of course I have not seen, will include the outreach that's going to be conducted by the corporation towards communities who are interested in having a launch site located within their geographic boundaries. And that in order to set up a launch site, again, this will be in the strategic plan. It seems like there will be a process for the corporation to reach out, and any location of a launch site will also have to go through DEP types of approval or regulations, as well as regular sort of site surveys for any type of for a launch site. So
I was wondering if they have to have.
So,
I was just wondering if they had to go through a voting process or something to allow it or whatever.
Okay, so I believe the strategic plan will address that issue. So once I believe the committee is essentially telling me you would like to have the strategic plan presented to the committee.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that
Yeah.
what has been requested?
Yes.
And then I had a follow-up, if I may, before we take another one from Representative Ducharme, mentioned the financials related to the spaceport in New Mexico. What about the financials would you like me to look into and bring back?
Well, I'd just like to take a look. I know there's certainly some, there are values that are not necessarily evident on a balance sheet with respect to the educational values and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, if this is going to be a public-private partnership, we should look at a model where it has been done to see exactly how it's performing before we commit to putting the taxpayers' money behind something like this, particularly given the fact that we have the ability to get those numbers. I mean, I downloaded the latest financial statement from the New Mexico Spaceport Corporation in about 30 seconds, so I could email that to you if you want to see that.
Yes,
you know,
I'm wondering, in conducting my analysis, what is it you're asking me to look for in the financial details?
Well, I'd like to look to see that after the length of time that New Mexico has been in existence, have they in fact moved from using public money to now using all private money? Does that make sense? Because if this is something that is going to be a continual investment by the taxpayers of Maine, I'm not sure that's palatable. If it's going to be something that ultimately can stand on its own, which is basically what we were told in the initial public hearing, the creation of the public-private partnership was basically to remove the obstacles that were in the way for government. I think, at some point in time, we need to make sure that we're not creating a governmental obstacle for this, and rather that if government has a role in this, that it is merely to facilitate this to happen as opposed to fund it. It sounds to me like there's plenty of private money out there, and they just may need some kind of facility to coordinate the introduction of those funds and the removal of governmental obstacles from getting this thing done. And that's really what I'm looking for.
Okay, so I can bring back well, I'm not sure I believe I can probably locate it for all of the organizations listed under the private public corporation from their, I believe it's all in their annual reports. That I can tell you revenue streams. I can tell you how much they got from the state versus private versus there's probably a separation for grants.
Yep.
Or other sources. Okay.
Those are the kinds of things that I think would be really helpful for us if we're going to build this authority, knowing what it has done in the past with other states. Thank you.
Representative Austin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to our conversation on tabling, just a few thoughts. I find it a little bit difficult for anybody, any member of our committee, to kind of predispose a motion that they're anticipating making for a reasonable, in other words, they have the best intentions in mind. We've run into this now 2 or 3 times. I know last week, I think it was, I was ready to ask something and it was tabled. And so be it. But I think what we may be running into is if we could get a little more clear explanation of procedure on tabling, it might help all of us. But I do think that being in a Zoom situation, that we're not in the same room, we're not watching each other on each side of our, you know, our neighbors, our partners and teammates, and it makes it hard to anticipate when it is going to happen, and then correspondingly, what is allowed after. I think it's probably asking a lot for people to be able to get everything out ahead of, we don't know that we need it until we know if the tabling motion even passed. So it's like, what comes first, the horse or the wagon? So if we could just get a little clarification, maybe from the chair for next meeting on tabling and how we really should be proceeding with it and reacting to it, I would appreciate that for myself and for our entire committee, because this is kind of new stuff when we're on this, in this Zoom posture. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Austin. And I'll just note that was the guidance I was given, but I will circle back and confirm that. And mostly you're looking for the purposes of what happened when this bill was tabled. 6 hands went up. And you're officially getting back in a work session at that point, because then there becomes a back and forth. And so tabling the bill is tabling the bill. But I will, again, get clarification.
I appreciate I understand the situation that you were put into. I appreciate that. And I think if we could just get a little more clear guidance as to the timeliness and the actual, as I said again, I really think that not being in the same room really does put a particular challenge into how we can read. I mean, body language, I've always found that very valuable, sight and body language, and we don't really have a full view of any of that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. I would just encourage members when we are in our caucuses to have discussions about if there's information that you would like before a table is put up. And then when the chairs and leads talk to each other, we can communicate that as well. That communication was not had. So Representative Bernard.
Thank you very much, Chair Roberts. Kind of going along with what Representative Austin said, and I want to apologize for cutting off any questions. That was never my intent. We do play sort of a balancing act between asking for a tabling so that we don't move too fast into a vote. And I wanted to make sure that didn't happen, that we move to a vote, because as soon as there is a motion on the floor for a vote, then I can't, or anyone cannot ask for a table. So once the motion's on the floor, as I understand it, we have to vote on that motion before anybody can entertain a tabling. Am I correct about that?
Tabling motion precedes any other motion on the table.
And so you could do that even if there was a motion to vote on a bill, you can sort of interrupt that discussion and say, I'd like to table.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll get clarification, but that's what I know to be true.
Okay, that's really good to know.
I believe Representative Ducharme had called that out once when we missed up.
Okay, that's great. And once a motion is on the floor, I can understand where people begin to take their positions on it. And so to table at that point, even though that may be correct, to try to table at that time is almost counterproductive. I mean, people either want to vote for the motion on the bill or against the motion on the bill, and tabling seems like one of those nebulous things that we're kicking the can down the road. That's not my intention. I want to make sure, and so I'm going to ask the question regarding tabling. I'm hoping that between now and the time that this is brought back, we do have several questions. And I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Ms. Olson for all the work that she did on this bill, because it's complicated. And she gave it to us, just a little bit before we came back. And I'm sure that her workload is huge. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for that. And I wonder if there's a way, just as Representative Hassenfuss talked about process, if there's a chance that when it comes to getting a lot of information, if when we get this information and it's not very far in advance, that we need to be able to have some time to digest it. In fact, I had a discussion with Senator Curry, I'm sorry he's not here today, about how information is being given to us kind of, it seems like at the last minute. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was being pushed or forced. And I don't think that that's the case. I think we're just trying to get our work done. But I also think we need to get our work done in a thoughtful way and to make sure that what we do is correct. And so Senator Searway had said to me, that's not going to happen anymore. We're not going to get information kind of at the last minute and be forced to vote on it. So I just want to say that out loud, that was our discussion. And that's one of the reasons that I would want to table. But the other question, now that I've talked about process, which is the tabling situation, the other question that I have, I guess for Ms. Olson, or maybe it isn't, maybe it's for Senator Daughtry, and that is, can I ask this? If it's for Senator Daughtry? Stop me.
The work session is open.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Okay. So the question is, if this entity, the corporation, is indeed set up, does that mean that that the corporation would try to determine one site, one launch site for whatever entities come into the state to use this? That's a question that I have. Or would it be several launch sites? Because I understand that depending upon the kind of company, the kind of space company you are, you may need a particular kind of launch site if you're launching vertically, or if you're launching horizontally. So I know that there are some requirements of different kinds of companies, and I would want to make sure that if we just get one launch site, that might be a problem. The other thing is that if there is only one launch site, that whoever comes into the state to be a company, to be a space company, I believe, but check me if I'm wrong, would they have to coordinate their schedules to work with one launch site, two launch sites, whatever you say is going to be the way that the corporation would work?
If I may respond, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Bernard. I think that's a little bit of a crystal ball question where we don't want to be prescribing to this entity what to do. But what I do understand from everyone I've spoken to is that no, it wouldn't be one launch site, because as you said, there's different uses. And what's made me really excited when I've been working on this bill is the fact that it touches every portion of our state. Oftentimes we're looking at a piece that, for both of our areas, say, it's just dealing with Loring, or it's just dealing with Brunswick Landing, or maybe it's a bill just dealing with one portion. This is one of those rare opportunities where it's really been conversations about the entire state. And, you might have a hub that might be in one area, or maybe divided between two places, capturing sort of northern and southern areas, that's coordinating with multiple launch sites all throughout the state. It has that potential to drive innovation where it benefits all of us instead of just one region. And I know that's a concern for every lawmaker in the legislature of it's not just about our communities we're representing, it's how do we benefit us as a whole? Because oftentimes, a place that might be better for like the research and development and having, the space to go through this might be very densely populated. So that probably won't work for a launch site. So you might be working on a technology in one place, working with different, companies, and then be traveling throughout the state to one of the different launch sites to see how it works. So that's what I think is really, really exciting about this. But obviously, from following the launch that you had in your area, there's a lot that goes into choosing these launch sites. And I think that is one of the things that private business has been saying, is that this corporation will help them go through that process and be that coordinator to look at all the various different sites. But I have not heard any one person say, if we get this through, we're only going to be launching from Greenville, Maine, and we'll only be launching from Wallagrass. Everyone's been very clear that there's a bunch of different areas that are under consideration, and that why Maine is poised to be such a success at this is because of where we are on the orbits. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the coast or you're, in our Western mountains. There's a lot of potential for a much shorter launch than any other area in the US.
Thank you, Senator. And just as a kind of note to committee members who this may be their first term and have jumped into this hybrid situation, I can't speak for all committees, but I know on committees that I have served in, when it comes to work sessions, you go to session in the morning, you go to your committee, and the analyst presents their analysis then, and you go into work session. So even the notice we're getting this far ahead of time is more than we would get in a typical session. Usually get the paper in front of you in the work session. And I think anyone who's in their second, third, or fourth term here can, if we could have conversations within your caucuses about that, I think that would be helpful. Representative Hassenfuss? Was your hand up?
I see that there's a hand up from Senator
Daughtry.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump out of line. And I don't know if it's helpful. It's not answering a direct question, but having been on this committee before and dealing with this a lot, this is watching you all, go over the tabling motion. In education, we deal with a lot of bills that take us sometimes 4 or 5. I mean, we had 15 work sessions on one chapter review. And so what we've done between the two caucuses is we have that conversation of saying, hey, we're going to need more work on this. So once we're done, let's make sure we table it. It's not, we all struggle with this, but yeah, having that conversation instead of making the motion, just saying, hey, let's keep the conversation going. But I think we're not ready to take a vote on this yet, is what we tend to do on the bigger bills. So hopefully that helps. Just figured I'd throw that out because I've been in all of your shoes on that before, and it can be pretty complicated. Any bill that, sometimes a short bill can be just as complicated, but oftentimes it takes quite a few work sessions.
Representative Hassenfuss.
I would like to make a motion to table, and before anybody seconds it, just remember that there are other questions and you don't second my motion, the motion fails. So with that, I ask if anybody wants to second my motion.
We have a motion on the table, seconded by Representative Austin. Motion to table. Ms. Reed, please call the roll. Eva, are you there? I think we can probably do hands on this one, guys. Is this?
She says that your mic isn't working in the chat.
Okay. Can we do a show of hands here and just keep them up, please, to table? Okay, I sufficiently see all hands up. Okay, all right, so LD 1923 is tabled. Thank you, Senator Daughtry. Have a good afternoon. Ms. Olson, I believe we had GEAs on, but with Senator Curry not here, I think we're not going to do that today.
Okay, I do have one other issue that I need to bring back to the committee then before we adjourn. So this is in regards to a committee bill that the majority of the committee voted to have printed for the purposes of being referred back to the committee. The bill in question is the committee bill for the registration for general contractors and for home improvement and construction. I'm going to put it up on the screen and I'm bringing it back. At this point, I have drafted it from the language that was submitted by the department. Upon doing so, there were noted some the necessity for technical changes to how it was drafted in certain areas in order for it to make it out of ROS. So there are certain elements. I know you are all familiar with putting in a bill request for cloture and then having it drafted. And at times you might get a follow-up from the drafter or from Ross for more information. And that's essentially what I'm asking of you now. And I need a chance just to show you that it does look different than the language that was in the draft in a couple of key areas. And then there were 2 locations where I need more information. This does not require another vote. This is just to clarify unless the decision changes anyone's opinion. And I'll remind you that this was not unanimous. It was a majority vote to have this printed and reported out for the purposes of being sent to committee to work. So it's in draft form. It has not gone to the revisor's office. This is in an attempt to get it so that the revisor's office can tackle it in order for it to be printed. And what's highlighted are the areas that I had to make significant changes for the purpose of formatting and technical issues. And that the first one is in the definition of home improvement. In the original draft, it included a section that said what home improvement was not. In order to address that, there's the addition of the term other than incidental work. Incidental work would be the stuff that was considered not home improvement. And so there's also now the addition of the word and the definition of incidental work to include the stuff that had been in that provision. And then a little bit of a restructuring as that was a little too messy and not formatted correctly enough to move forward. And I'm just showing this so everyone's aware of the technical changes and there's no surprise when you see it printed. The application, the original draft really wanted it to say that all of this would be done electronically and only electronically. I have reworded this to read in an electronic form prescribed by the department to address that concern here. And then there was this information here. So the draft in F had used 10-year period for information related to bankruptcy, but the ones that are in yellow had just X year period. And this is as it relates to criminal convictions, et cetera, and outstanding judgments or liens. So my assumption, again, but I can't make this choice, was that if 10 years was good for F, 10 would also be okay for E and G, but I do need the committee to give direction on those as the draft you voted on only contained X number of years. So you do need to specify for E and G for me before moving on.
I would say that those should be 10 as well, unless anyone else on the majority disagrees. Again, this is just for drafting it. We can always figure it out in work session.
Right. And so just to remind everybody, we're talking about, imagine that you have put a request into the revisor's office for closure and, you've asked somebody to draft this language and you get it out and you decide you might need it a cycle 2 or something like that. Like this is what we're doing right now. It's not a final language review. This will get printed and referred back to the committee, and then we'll actually work it. And I'm sure that we'll have other things to discuss. So I'll move forward with those 10s that are highlighted then. I just wanted to also, there was some language that was more interpretive than just telling them what they have to do, prescriptive. So under the public posting of registrants, I've also included the disclaimer language. There was a scope, the very beginning of the bill had a scope and purpose section, which, as I know you've heard from me before, it really is just not something that is done anymore for a number of reasons and helps to confuse it. So I removed that, and the stuff that was in that has been dispersed throughout the bill, and one of those disbursements has to do with this portion here about public posting. So the department shall include notice on its publicly accessible website that the information supplied by the registrant is not validated by the department and confers no assurance of competence. So that was language that was in the scope and purpose section and has been added as an actual prescriptive action to be taken by the department rather than a purpose statement. And then the final thing that I need clarification, that's not a technical change, but that I actually need information from the committee, the majority of the committee who voted for this, is the amount for the annual registration fee for registration.
I would put 150 in there for now, unless anyone, and we can work it out when it comes back. Representative Geiger.
Just a question on that, Chair Roberts. I thought the department in the past has said that they set the annual fee based on the number of people who will be paying so that it covers the workload of the department. Is that?
That's typically for a board and for licensing. So it's to cover the licensing board. This isn't a license, so there's no board.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Andrews?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of order. Isn't this your bill that we need to pass the gavel just for?
What?
Isn't this your bill that we need to pass the gavel to a different chair?
It is not my bill. This is a committee bill.
Okay.
And also, just to be clear, it's not a bill. It's currently an LR. It's not printed and it's not been referred to committee. So this is a request by the committee to have a bill printed. Okay, then that's all. I just wanted to run this by you. And when I do have a final version ready to be printed, I will share that version as well. So again, you'll see it before it gets to the floor to be referred back to committee.
Okay. Was that it, or was there another one? No, the other
No,
ones. That
no,
was
the other committee bill was just an appropriations ask. Again, when I didn't need any further clarification on that. So once I have a final printed version or a final version from Ross that will go to be printed, I will share that.
okay. And do you have anything else as far as language review? Is that it?
No, I do not have anything else for language review.
Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Can you debate a motion to adjourn?
I got a question. Do we have anything going Friday?
On Friday? No, but this is
Nothing?
it for the week for us. Yep.
Okay, all right.